From its very earliest days, the story of the conquest of the air has been marked by great technological achievements. These have enabled civil and military aircraft to fly ever further, ever faster. Research projects, too, have become ever more sophisticated. But the road to today's high-flying, high-speed jets is also pitted with white elephants, the bizarre, and sometimes the plain mad. For aviation has over the years attracted its fair share of would-be geniuses, whose grandiose theories did not stand up in practice. There have also been those whose courage has been matched by their foolhardiness. Yet many weird designs have flown successfully. Other strange-looking aircraft, like the Franco-German A300-600T Beluga, not only fly, but perform a valuable role. In this case, it is to transport aircraft parts for the Airbus European Aviation Consortium. The dolphin-like shape originated in the Guppy series, developed by the American company Aero Space Lines from the Boeing C-97 Stratocruiser transport aircraft. The Guppy was used for the carriage of space boosters from NASA contractors to the launch pad. It was also used to transport parts for the Anglo-French Concorde supersonic airliner. Other aircraft appeared to have potential when they were designed, but turned out to be obsolete when they reached prototype stage. One such was the British Bristol Brabazon, which made its maiden flight in September 1949. It was the largest British aircraft to date, weighing 140 tons, and was designed to transport 100 passengers across the Atlantic. But to get it airborne, the Bristol Aircraft Company's runway had to be extended, and this included rerouting a road and demolishing an entire village. By the time the Brabazon had flown, the Boeing Stratocruiser was already flying the transatlantic route with up to 100 passengers. It didn't need an extended runway. Another mammoth was the dream of one man, multimillionaire Howard Hughes, owner of the Hughes Aircraft Company and Trans World Airlines. Hughes had already made his name with his H-1 racer, which set a world land speed record of just over 350 miles per hour in 1935. He was also the inspiration behind the Lockheed Constellation airliner and military transport. Howard Hughes then began work on a flying boat transport. Officially called the HK-1 Hercules, it became better known as the Spruce Goose. This 150-ton Leviathan was powered by 24,000 horsepower worth of engine. Spruce Goose made its public debut on the 2nd of November 1947 for what was billed as a taxiing trial, with Hughes himself at the controls. A journalist managed to get aboard Spruce Goose and described what happened.
Throttle, it's 60, it bounces to 65, it's 70, it's 75, and something momentarily he cuts out, and I believe we are airborne. We are airborne, ladies and gentlemen. We were really up in the air. And I don't know whether, Howard, did you expect that? Certainly, I like to make surprises. You were surprised or not? No, I said I thought I'd make a surprise.
Yet in spite of achieving liftoff, Spruce Goose, like its land-based Brabazon rival, would have been very expensive to run. Besides which, the day of the flying boat was virtually over, now that land-based aircraft could cross oceans at significantly higher speeds. It was Hughes' last aviation design venture. In contrast, other aircraft, like the German Dornier Doe X, were too far ahead of their time. Claude Dornier designed this 12-engine giant in the late 1920s, with the aim of establishing a transatlantic air service. The Doe X made a number of proving flights. The climax came in October 1929, when 150 passengers, together with 9 stowaways, were flown for an hour around Lake Constance on the German-Swiss border. These flights resulted, however, in a change of engine, from German Siemens to more powerful American Curtiss. A year later, on the 5th of November 1930, the Doe X set off on what was to become a marathon flight. The ultimate aim was to cross the Atlantic, but first it flew via Amsterdam to the British port of Southampton. Among the passengers on board for this first leg were Claude Dornier and his wife. The Doe X then flew down in stages to Lisbon, Portugal. Here, a serious fire in the port wing delayed it for over 2 months. Proceeding to Las Palmas in the Canaries, the Doe X sustained further damage while taking off. Repairs took another 3 months before it lifted off once more for the island of Boubac, where the Atlantic is at its narrowest. Towards the end of May 1931, over 6 months after it first set out, the Doe X was ready to cross the ocean. A large load of fuel had to be taken on board, and the Doe X was unable to get airborne. It therefore flew to the Cape Verde Islands for a further attempt, which took place on the 4th of June. This time, the Doe X just got airborne, but was forced to fly a mere 10 feet above the water until sufficient fuel had been burnt off to enable it to climb higher. It reached Natal and then carried out a tour of South America. The Doe X created a stir wherever it went. The giant flying boat then turned north. Flying up the coast, it now island hopped across the Caribbean to New York. The Doe X arrived here on the 27th of August 1931, over 9 months after it had left Germany. As had been the case elsewhere, its arrival created much excitement among New Yorkers. After wintering in America, the Doe X returned to Germany, this time flying over the North Atlantic. In contrast to the outward flight, this one took a mere 5 days. The giant aircraft received a tumultuous reception when it returned to its homeland. Yet the German national airline, Lufthansa, in whose livery the Doe X had been painted, was not convinced and did not take up its option. True, 2 more Doe X's were built and served briefly with the Italian Air Force before being scrapped in 1935. As for the original Doe X, it found a home in the Aviation Museum in Berlin, but was destroyed in 1945 in an Allied air raid. Claude Dornier's dream of establishing a transatlantic route was just too ambitious for its time. The 7,640 horsepower developed by the 12 Curtiss Conqueror engines was simply not powerful enough to lift the 56 tons of fully laden Doe X into the air. But other imaginative designs of the 1920s and 1930s never even left the ground. Some concepts were highly original in design. One of these was the belief that placing the propeller inside a duct would lead to greater efficiency. Flying barrel prototypes did actually fly in the early 1930s, but proved less efficient than more conventional aircraft because of the added weight and drag. The thirst for speed in the 1930s led to a breed of aircraft called racers. One of these was the American Granville GB-R1, which was little more than a massive engine connected to stubby wings. Jimmy Doolittle, one of the most famous aviators of all time, called the GB the touchiest plane I have ever been in because of its instability. Others flying it did not live to tell the tale. It was a highly dangerous aircraft. Rocket power was successfully applied to the German Second World War Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. It also enabled the Bell X-1 to become the first aircraft to fly supersonic. In the 1920s, however, designers had the dream that rocket manpacks could provide a simple form of individual flight. Even so, the concept had a resurgence in the United States in the 1960s, and people did actually fly. Jet power was also applied, but the main problem was that the backpack could only carry sufficient fuel for some 4 minutes flight. Thus, dreams that this form of transport might replace the car as a commuter vehicle were dashed. Running in parallel with the Manpack was the Hoppycopter, which was developed in the United States as a means of quickly deploying infantry about the battlefield. An aptly named variant of this was the Flying Donut. There was also the Flying Trash Can. But while great fun to fly, these machines proved to be non-cost-effective as aerial vehicles and never got beyond prototype stage. Another series of prototypes also included some weird-looking machines. These experimental types were used in the development of vertical takeoff and landing, VTOL, aircraft. It's difficult to believe that this Dornier rig was capable of leaving the ground, but even more bizarre was this Canadian prototype, perhaps the only genuine flying saucer to have flown. Yet the experience gained from this type of machine led to the development of the highly successful Harrier jump jet. During 1939-45, the Germans in particular came up with some unusual designs. One was the massive Messerschmitt Me-321 Gigant glider, the largest of its day. Apart from the difficulties in getting it off the ground, the Gigant was very hard to fly because its controls were not power-assisted. Landing it especially called for a high degree of pilot skill and physical strength. A 6-engine powered version, the Me-323, was developed. This could carry 130 fully equipped troops, light tanks, and other vehicles. But its bulk and 130-mile-an-hour top speed made it easy to shoot down. The Germans also produced a piggyback machine for attacks on ships and strongpoints. It consisted of an FW-190, or Me-109 fighter, attached to a Junkers Ju-88 bomber filled with explosive. The bomber would be directed at the target and released, but the Mistel, as it was called, was easy to shoot down if caught before this happened. Another intriguing German design was the Blohm & Voss BV-141 reconnaissance aircraft, with its offset crew compartment. Although the prototype showed potential, the concept was considered too unconventional, and it never entered service. More successful was the unusual Dornier Doe 335 Thiel, or Arrow. Its combined pusher and tractor propellers gave it an impressive top speed of 455 miles per hour, but the Pfeil arrived too late to see combat. There have been some aircraft designers who were obsessed by a burning conviction, and one of these was American Jack Northrop. During the 1920s, he worked with Lockheed and designed the highly successful Vega, which made a number of record-breaking flights. Northrop was also responsible for a series of high-speed, single-engine passenger and freight aircraft, and what became the Douglas Dauntless dive bomber. But he became convinced that the conventional wings and fuselage approach to design was not the most aerodynamically efficient shape. Consequently, in 1930, Northrop unveiled a revolutionary prototype, with cockpit and engine totally enclosed in the wing. Northrop was, however, not the first to produce a flying wing. The British Westland Company built their first, aptly named pterodactyl tailless prototype as early as 1925. But while the concept created much interest, no one was prepared to take it seriously. It was the same with Jack Northrop, even though his designs became ever more aerodynamically efficient. In 1946, however, he unveiled his XB-35 flying wing bomber prototype, which was capable of carrying 28 tons of bombs some 10,000 miles. But Northrop also had visions of a flying wing airliner.
An aeroplane of the XB-35 configuration and size can carry 50 passengers in comfort in the existing aerofoil envelope, with adequate headroom for all, and with vision forward through the leading edge, downward through windows in the floor, and upward if desired. Passenger vision in a flying wing may be more satisfactory than in conventional types if we get used to the idea of forward vision rather than that provided by side windows.
Civil aviation was not interested, although the US Air Force was sufficiently impressed by the XB-35 to place an order for it. The coming of the jet bomber prompted Northrop to convert the B-35, and the result was the YB-49. Unfortunately, economic cuts not only prompted the USAF to opt for the more conventional Convair B-36, but also an order for 200 B-35s was axed. This appeared to mark the end of Northrop's flying wing. Yet some 40 years later, the B-2 stealth bomber had many of Jack Northrop's flying wing characteristics, and indeed is made by his company. Sadly, he himself did not live long enough to see the B-2 fly. But of all the fields of aviation, the most bizarre has been the pursuit of successful human-powered flight.
Through a system of leverage advantage, plus a man's physical power, I believe it possible to fly as a bird.
This has been a dream pursued by man since almost the dawn of time. 16th century Italian genius Leonardo da Vinci was the first to seriously use the flapping principle for human-powered flight. and this type of machine became known as an ornithopter. In the centuries after Da Vinci, many others attempted to develop ornithopters which could actually fly. Their ideas were fanciful, to say the least. In 1874, Vincent de Groot thought he would have more chance if he launched himself from a balloon, but fell to his death in a London street. Other birdmen selected more modest platforms from which to jump. Paris's Eiffel Tower saw an Austrian tailor called Reichelt, in his specially designed flying suit, leap from the top on the 6th of February, 1912. Alas, he fell like a stone. By now, of course, the heavier-than-air flying machine, powered by a petrol engine, was more than a dream, and was becoming ever faster and flying ever further. The human-powered aviation designer could not, of course, take advantage of this power source, but he could use the wing principle and combine it with pedal power in the shape of the bicycle. In June 1912, no less than 30 contestants vied in Paris for a prize offered by the French motor company Peugeot for the first to take to the air. None succeeded. The purist ornithopter designers, on the other hand, were beginning to realize that birds did not spend all their time flapping their wings when in flight, but took advantage of thermals to give them lift. But the birdmen still had to get off the ground. In the 1920s, one bird woman, who called herself Madame Albertini, became convinced that self-belief was the secret.
I have strong conviction that by utilizing these inner universal forces, we shall all be able to fly like the birds. And I am now starting a school to train the children to develop these powers while they are young.
But neither she nor her students were able to generate sufficient mental power to prove her theory. The cycle power enthusiasts continued to pursue what seemed to be an impossible dream, with one design team launching their machine off rails. This Briton decided to cheat by using a car to help generate the required initial flying speed. He received his just deserts. So did this rather portly gentleman with his rocket-powered cycle flyer. Thanks to the use of a catapult to get it off the ground, this pedal-powered German glider of the 1930s did actually achieve human-powered flight. Even after the Second World War had seen the jet begin to take over from the piston-engined aircraft, the dream of getting airborne with human power alone remained strong. The purists continued to try to prove what was technically unachievable. At the end of the 1950s, however, the Royal Aeronautical Society offered £5,000 sterling, and industrialist Henry Kramer matched it with a further £5,000 for the first British human-powered machine to fly a figure of 8 around 2 pylons placed exactly half a mile apart. This implied not just getting airborne, but controlled flight as well. The prize provided the impetus for a more scientific approach to the problem of human-powered flight. Accordingly, a team of students from the Aeronautics Department of the British University of Southampton built a machine which was bicycle-powered but took advantage of new lightweight materials for the fuselage and wings. In November 1961, their machine managed to fly a distance of 70 yards, well short of the Kramer stipulation, but significantly better than any previous man-powered flight attempt. Six months later, in May 1962, another British team, made up of the newly formed Hatfield Man-Powered Aircraft Club, and including engineers from the de Havilland Aircraft Company, unveiled their Puffin monoplane. This achieved a straight flight of almost 1,000 yards, but lacked the capability to fly Kramer's figure of 8. Kramer now broadened the competition by making it an international prize of £50,000. As the 60s wore on into the 70s, many more attempts were made to win the Kramer Prize, but it continued to elude everyone. Some, like this 1970 Birdman, continue to favor the traditional ornithopter approach. The result was as expected. In 1976, American aeronautical engineer Paul B. McCready Jr., together with volunteers from the California Institute of Technology, decided that the Kramer Prize must be won. They designed and built Gossamer Condor. This ultra-light machine had a 97-foot wingspan and a pusher propeller. A stabilizer, mounted on a long boom, protruded in front of the aircraft. But while it certainly flew, early attempts on the Kramer Prize met with frustration.
Go left! Stop pedaling! Stop pedaling full left! Oh, shh! Oh! Gee! Oh, shh! No, that wasn't your fault. You did everything right.
But the team persevered, and on the 23rd of August 1977, with racing cyclist Brian Allen at the controls, Gossamer Condor took off. Brian Allen pedaled for 6 minutes, during which he completed the statutory figure of 8. Thus, the Kramer Prize was finally won, but it was by no means the end of the story. For McCready's success spurred him to tackle a more ambitious goal, a human-powered flight across the English Channel. He was also motivated by a prize of £100,000 put up by Henry Kramer for this. McCready built a new machine, drawing on his experience with Gossamer Condor.
And it turns out that the only other flyer that you can compare it with is not a glider, not the Wright biplane, not a bird, but an insect. It has about the same characteristics as the dragonfly.
In spite of this, Macready named his new plane Gossamer Albatross. Carbon fiber material made it even lighter than its predecessor, for Macready well recognized the basic problem of successful human-powered flight. This is that the human body cannot produce more than 225 watts of energy over any length of time. Yet the engines on even the earliest heavier-than-air planes developed 10,000 watts, over 40 times more than this. As Brian Allen demonstrated, efficient gearing of the pedals does ease the problem. Having the largest possible wing area also helps through providing increased lift, but this must be set against overall weight. On the 13th of June 1979, Brian Allen prepared to fly Gossamer Albatross across the English Channel, 70 years after Louis Blériot's first powered flight over it. He took off from England at 7 o'clock in the morning.
The worst moment was in mid-channel after about an hour and 40 minutes. I decided to give up, but my radio contact had given out, and I made frantic hand signals to the boats that I wanted to go up 10 to 15 feet so they could come beneath me and hook up a tow. But as I got up there, the air became calmer, and I thought, what a drag! It's much calmer here, I'll go on.
Allen persevered, and 3 hours after setting off, landed at Cap Grinet on the French coast. Whereas Blériot had flown the channel in the opposite direction in just 37 minutes, it had taken Allen 3 hours of hard pedaling. Thus Macready won his second Kramer Prize, and the prospects for human-powered flight appeared ever more rosy. But Brian Allen's achievement did not diminish more light-hearted attempts. Every summer there are human-powered flying contests at some of Britain's seaside resorts. These attract all manner of weird and wonderful contraptions, although the majority are based on hang gliders. The Japanese go even further. This competition consisted of 3 separate classes, one of which was for hang gliders. Another was for more imaginative flying devices. The final class was for true human-powered machines. Some of these did get airborne, but controlled flight proved a problem. The winner, however, looked well capable, at least for a time, of crossing the Pacific Ocean. But he too eventually ran out of pedal power. During the 1980s, however, another flying machine was designed and built, this time by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They named it Daedalus. This was for good reason, since they planned to recreate the ancient Greek myth of Daedalus's escape, using wings made of wax from the cruel King Minos of Crete to the island of Santorini, 73 miles away. But during the flight, his son Icarus fell to his death after flying too close to the sun, which melted his wings. The Greek government supported the venture and produced one of the country's leading racing cyclists, Kanelos Kanellopoulos, to be the pilot. Kanellopoulos was taught to fly, and on the 23rd of April 1988 took off in Daedalus from a Cretan cliff 120 feet above the sea. Soon Kanellopoulos had settled into a rhythm of 95 revolutions of his pedals to the minute, and assisted by a tail breeze, Daedalus was flying at a speed of nearly 20 miles per hour. After some 3 hours in the air, he neared Santorini, his goal. As he tried to adjust his course so as to land on the beach, a sudden gust of wind snapped the tail and Daedalus dropped into the sea, luckily without injury to its pilot. Kanellopoulos' human-powered flight distance record of 73 miles stands to this day. But while this form of flight appeared to have reached the limit of current technology, a new form of aircraft was being developed, solar-powered. The heat from the very rays that sent Icarus plunging to his death can be converted to useful energy by using special cells. Indeed, much work has been done in developing solar-powered cars as a more ecologically friendly form of transport. There was therefore no reason why the same power source should not be applied to aircraft. Indeed, by the end of the 1970s, solar-powered aircraft using battery-driven motors were being built. Then, in August 1980, a smaller version of Paul MacCready's human-powered aircraft, which had flown the English Channel the previous year, made a flight of 2 miles at Edwards Air Force Base, California. MacCready now built another solar-powered aircraft, Solar Challenger. It had a 47-foot wingspan containing no less than 16,000 solar cells. On the 7th of July 1981, Solar Challenger took off from an airfield outside Paris, France. Climbing to an altitude of 12,000 feet, it cruised at 37 miles per hour over the English Channel, landing on an RAF airfield in the southeast corner of England. In a flight of nearly 5.5 hours, Stephen Piacek, the pilot, had achieved an aviation milestone. Since then, the advancement of solar-powered aircraft has rapidly increased. Indeed, NASA is now developing planes to cruise at altitudes of up to 100,000 feet for days at a time, while they monitor weather and pollution. But while alternative means of powering aircraft were being successfully pursued, there was one major aviation challenge still to be overcome. By the 1950s, aircraft, especially strategic bombers, were able to fly around the world non-stop. This was thanks to air refueling. Californian aircraft builder Burt Rutan developed a name for himself in the 1970s for his aerodynamically advanced foam and fiberglass aircraft. The ambition grew in him to design an aircraft which would fly unaided around the world. Rutan began work in 1982 with a small team to build a plane capable of flying at least 24,000 miles without refueling. His team included his brother Dick, a Vietnam combat veteran, and Dick's partner, Gina Yeager, who was at pains to make clear she was not related to General Chuck Yeager, the first man to fly at supersonic speed. The result of their efforts was Voyager, an aircraft built of ultralight materials, but with every available space, including the wing structure, crammed with fuel tanks. The crew, Dick Rutan and Gina Yeager, had a very cramped cockpit, in which one of them was forced to lie prone. At 8 a.m. on the 14th of December 1986, and filled with 1,200 gallons of fuel, Voyager prepared to take off from Edwards Air Force Base, the scene of so many aviation feats. So laden with fuel was it, that it seemed that Voyager would never leave the ground. Finally, as the end of the runway approached, the wings began to lift and Voyager took to the air. Rutan and Yeager set off westwards around the globe, but it was crucial that they avoided any storms, which might easily tear their fragile aircraft apart. They were therefore very dependent on their ground control to guide them around any danger areas. This was especially over Africa, where a number of storms were spotted. But diversions to their planned course meant that fuel began to run low, and the two pilots were becoming exhausted. Yet it was their determination to succeed which won through. And just after 8 a.m. on the 23rd of December, Voyager touched down at Edwards to the applause of 50,000 spectators.
There it is.
Rutan and Yeager had flown nearly 25,000 miles in just over 9 days. They landed with a mere 37 gallons of fuel left in the tanks. Some people may call the Rutan brothers and Gina Yeager madcaps, others oddballs. Yet they had the vision, courage and will to succeed. Indeed, the story of flight is filled with men and women of the same unbending character, and without them, man's conquest of the air would still be very incomplete.